The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of northern Alaska as Dr. David Mitchell stepped out of his research truck. He had been working at the remote government facility for 8 years now, studying strange materials and unusual specimens that the military brought him. Most days were routine, boring even. But today felt different. David pulled his thick coat tighter as he walked toward the old storage building. His supervisor had given him a new assignment that morning, something about checking on a specimen that had been sitting in cold storage for 3 years. The paperwork was thin, almost suspiciously so. All it said was that the subject came from a crash site and needed a health evaluation. The building was older than the main facility. Back in the 1980s, when this place was just a weather station. Now it housed things that the government didn't want the public to know about. David had learned not to ask too many questions over the years. It was easier that way, and it kept his security clearance intact. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered. Air smelled of disinfectant and something else he couldn't identify, something metallic and strange. David found the specimen room according to his directions. Room B7. The heavy metal door had 3 different locks and a warning sign that made his stomach twist. When he opened the door, the first thing that hit him was the cold. It was freezing in there, much colder than the rest of the building. The second thing that hit him was far worse. The smell of decay and neglect. And then he saw her. She was sitting in the corner of a bare concrete cell, barely moving. At first glance, David thought she might be human. She had the basic shape of a young woman, maybe 20 years old. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed the differences. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow faintly. Strange crystal-like growths ran along her arms and neck, and her eyes, when she looked up at him, shifted from deep purple to pale silver. She was clearly not human, but she was also clearly suffering. The creature was thin, too thin. Her breathing was shallow and labored. The crystal growths on her skin looked dull and cracked, like they were dying. She wore what remained of some kind of metallic clothing that had seen better days. When she moved, David could see that she was weak, struggling to even lift her head. For a moment, they just stared at each other. David had studied many strange things in his career, but he had never seen anything like this. More importantly, he had never seen anything that looked so human in its suffering. Her eyes held intelligence, fear, and something that looked like hope when she saw him. David checked the clipboard again. The notes were brief and clinical. Subject found at crash site. Non-responsive to standard communication attempts. Physical condition declining. Scheduled for final examination and disposal next week. The word disposal made David's blood run cold. He looked back at the creature. She was watching him carefully, as if trying to understand what kind of person he was. David had always been good with animals and strange specimens. He had a gentle touch that his colleagues often mocked. But right now, that gentleness felt important. Slowly, David knelt down near the cell bars. The creature didn't back away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. David pulled out his medical scanner and showed it to her, moving very slowly so she could see he wasn't trying to hurt her. To his surprise, she nodded slightly, as if she understood. The scanner readings were alarming. Body temperature was dropping, her heart rate was irregular, and there were signs of severe malnutrition. But more than that, the scanner was picking up energy readings it couldn't identify. This creature wasn't just alien in appearance. Her entire biology was different from anything on Earth, David. Spent the next hour running basic tests and trying to make her more comfortable. He brought her water, which she drank eagerly. He adjusted the temperature controls to make the room warmer. The crystal growths on her skin began to glow a little brighter. As he worked, David found himself talking to her quietly, explaining what he was doing. He didn't expect her to understand, but it felt natural. And something strange started happening. Images began flashing in his mind. Pictures that weren't his own memories. Vast ship floating. In space, the same creature, but healthy and glowing, helping others of her kind. Then darkness, fire, and pain. David stumbled backward, his head spinning. The creature was looking at him intently, and he realized that somehow she had been showing him these images. She could communicate, just not with words. What she had shown him suggested that she wasn't just some random alien. She had been a healer, someone who helped others. The implications hit David like a freight train. This wasn't just some specimen to be studied and disposed of. This was a person, an intelligent being who had been locked away and forgotten. And according to his clipboard, she had less than a week to live. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the creature's eyes and the images she had shared with him. He started researching everything he could find about the crash site where she had been found. Most of the files were classified, but David had high enough clearance to access some of them. What he found disturbed him deeply. The crash had happened 3 years ago, but it hadn't been an attack or invasion. The ship had been responding to a distress signal from a human colony vessel that had gone off course. The alien ship had tried to help, but both vessels had been caught in a debris field from a destroyed asteroid. The humans had been rescued. The alien had been captured. David realized that this creature had risked her life to save humans. She had been repaid with imprisonment and neglect. The weight of that injustice sat heavy on his chest as he lay awake. Staring at the ceiling, the next morning, David returned to the storage building with medical supplies and better food. The creature seemed stronger, and the connection between them was clearer now. Through the mental images, she showed him more of her story. Her name translated roughly to something like Lightbringer in human terms. Her people were healers and explorers, traveling between worlds to help where they could. But David also learned something terrifying. The creature needed specific minerals. To survive, minerals that didn't exist naturally on Earth. Without them, her body was slowly shutting down. The crystal growths on her skin weren't just decorative. They were part of her biology, and they were dying. David checked his paperwork again. The final examination was scheduled for Monday. Today was Friday. He had 3 days to figure out what to do. 3 days to decide whether he was going to follow orders and let an innocent being die, or risk everything he had worked for to do what was right. As he sat there, watching the alien creature rest more peacefully than she had in years, David realized that the choice had already been made in his heart. The question now was whether he had the courage to act on it. David spent Saturday morning staring at his coffee, unable to take a single sip. The small apartment felt like a prison as he wrestled with the impossible decision before him. Save the alien and lose everything, or follow orders and let an innocent being die. Neither choice felt right. He had worked 15 years to get where he was. It's 15 years of studying, training, and proving himself worthy of top-secret clearance. His job at the facility was everything he had ever wanted. Good pay, cutting-edge research, and the respect of his peers. If he threw it all away now, what would he have left? The answer came to him immediately. Nothing. He would have absolutely nothing. David's phone buzzed with a text message from his ex-wife. Their daughter Katie was asking about him again. She was only 12 and barely remembered him from before the divorce 2 years ago. He had been so focused on his work that he had missed most of her childhood. Birthday parties, school plays, soccer games. All sacrificed for his career. Now Katie was asking if she could visit him soon. His ex-wife was actually considering it, which was progress. Maybe he could finally start being the father he should have been. But not if he threw away his job and ended up in prison for treason. David drove to the facility earlier than usual on Saturday. The place was mostly empty. On weekends, with just a skeleton crew of security guards, perfect for what he needed to do. He told himself he was just going to check on the specimen one more time. Maybe run a few more tests. Nothing wrong with being thorough. The alien looked worse than before. The glow from her crystal growths was barely visible now, and she seemed to be having trouble breathing. When she saw David, her eyes shifted from dark gray to a lighter shade, almost hopeful. She tried to sit up straighter, but the effort clearly exhausted her. David knelt by her cell and pulled out his medical scanner. The readings were worse than he had feared. Her body temperature had dropped another 2 degrees overnight. Her energy levels were critically low. At this rate, she might not even survive until Monday's final examination. As he worked, more images flashed in his mind. The alien was sharing her memories with him again. But these were different from before. She showed him her home world, a beautiful planet with crystal cities that caught and reflected light in ways that took his breath away. She showed him her people, beings like herself who dedicated their lives to healing and helping others. But then the images turned dark. David saw the destruction of her world, consumed by some kind of cosmic disaster that her people had been trying to prevent for generations. He felt her grief as she watched billions of her kind perish in moments. He experienced her desperation. As she and the few survivors scattered across the galaxy, searching for a new home while trying to help other species they encountered, the alien had been part of a medical ship, David realized. When they detected the human colony vessel in distress, she and her crew had immediately changed course to help. They had saved hundreds of human lives before the debris field caught both ships. The humans had been rescued by their own people. The aliens had been treated as invaders and captured. David pulled back from the mental connection, his head spinning with the intensity of her memories. The alien looked at him with those shifting eyes, and he could see the question there. She knew he understood her story now. She knew he realized she was innocent. The question was what he would do about it. That afternoon, David researched everything he could about the facility's security systems and procedures. He told himself he was just curious, just trying to understand how things worked. But deep down, he knew he was already planning something that would change his life forever. Monday morning arrived like a death sentence. David woke up with his stomach in knots, knowing that in just a few hours, the alien would be taken for her final examination. The paperwork used clinical terms, but David knew what it really meant. They were going to cut her open while she was still alive to study her unique biology before she died. At the facility, David's supervisor handed him the updated schedule. The examination was moved up to that afternoon. Budget concerns, the man explained with a shrug. No point in wasting more resources on a dying specimen? David nodded and tried to look professional. But inside he was screaming. They were talking about a living being like she was nothing more than a lab rat. A being who had risked everything to save human lives. During his lunch break, David sat in his truck and called his ex-wife. He didn't know why. Maybe he wanted to hear a friendly voice. Maybe he wanted to say goodbye to his old life. "How are you doing?" she asked, and David almost laughed at how loaded that question was. "I'm okay," he lied. "Hey, about Katie's visit, maybe we should wait a little longer? Things are complicated at work right now." "David, you always say that. Work is always complicated. When are you going to put your family first for once?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. When was he going to put what mattered first? When was he going to stop hiding behind his career and actually stand up for something important? After lunch, David watched from his office window as 2 guards headed toward the storage building. They were coming for the alien. In 30 minutes, she would be strapped to an examination table, and David would never see her alive again. His hands were shaking as he opened his computer and began typing a resignation letter. Then he deleted it. Then he started typing again. Then he deleted it again. How could he throw away 15 years of work? How could he destroy his future? But then he thought about the alien's memories, about her people who had dedicated their lives to helping others. Oh, he thought about how she had risked everything to save humans she had never met. He thought about his daughter and what kind of man he wanted her to see when she looked at him. David saved the resignation letter to his desktop, but didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, he walked to the storage building, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The guards were already there, preparing to move the alien. She looked up when David entered, and her eyes shifted to that hopeful silver color again. "I need to run one more test," David told the guards. "New orders from upstairs. Give me 15 minutes. The guards grumbled but left him alone with the alien. David knelt by her cell and looked into those shifting eyes one more time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for what my people have done to you." The alien tilted her head slightly, and David felt a warm presence in his mind. Images this time, but something that felt like forgiveness, like understanding, like hope. In that moment, David made his choice. He pulled out his security card and opened the cell door. The alien looked surprised but didn't move. David gently helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as her weak legs struggled to hold. "Hurry up. We're going to get you out of here," he whispered. "I don't know how, and I don't know where we'll go, but we're going to try." The alien's eyes shifted to a warm golden color, and David felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he was finally doing something that mattered. David's heart hammered against his ribs as he helped the alien to her feet. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile in his arms. Her skin felt cool to the touch, and he could see her struggling just to stay upright. It may be 10 minutes before the guards return, maybe less. "Can you walk?" David whispered, though he wasn't sure if she understood English or just read his thoughts. The alien nodded weakly and took a shaky step forward. Her legs wobbled like a newborn deer, but she was determined. David could feel her willpower through. Their mental connection, fierce desire to live despite everything she had endured. David grabbed his emergency medical kit from the wall and slung it over his shoulder. Then he wrapped his lab coat around the alien's shoulders to hide her distinctive appearance. Up close, the crystal growths on her skin were impossible to miss. But from a distance, she might pass for a sick human patient. They made it halfway down the corridor before David heard footsteps echoing from the main entrance. The guards were coming back early. David's mind raced as he looked around for somewhere to hide. There was a supply closet just ahead, but it would only delay the inevitable instead. David did something that surprised even himself. He pulled the fire alarm. Immediately, red lights began flashing, and sirens wailed throughout the building. Emergency protocols kicked in automatically. David knew the facility would evacuate everyone to the main building while security checked for threats. It would buy them maybe 20 minutes of confusion. "Come on," David urged, helping the alien toward the side exit. She was moving better now, as if the hope of escape was giving her strength. Her eyes had shifted to that golden color again, and the crystal growths on her skin were glowing slightly brighter. They burst through the emergency exit into the cold Alaska air. David's truck was parked just 50 yards away, but it felt like 50 miles. The alien stumbled in the snow, unused to the frozen ground. David caught her before she fell and half-carried. Half-dragged her to the vehicle. Getting her into the passenger seat was harder than expected. She seemed confused by the truck's interior, running her fingers along the dashboard with wonder. David realized she had probably never been in a human vehicle before. Every moment they spent there increased their chances of being caught, but he took a few seconds to show her how to use the seatbelt. David started the engine and drove away as calmly as possible. Too fast would attract attention from the security cameras. Too slow would mean getting caught when the guards realized their prisoner was missing. He forced himself to maintain normal speed as they passed through the facility's main gate. The guard on duty waved them through without a second glance. Just Dr. David Mitchell leaving early, probably heading to the main research center. Nothing unusual about that. It wasn't until they were 5 miles down the road that David allowed himself to breathe. The alien was slumped in the passenger seat, exhausted from the effort of walking, but she was alive, and she was free. "Where do we go now?" David asked out loud, though he was really asking himself. Images flashed in his mind. The alien was showing him something. Location, coordinates maybe. A place where her ship had crashed 3 years ago. David saw twisted metal buried under snow and ice, but also something else. Some kind of emergency cache that might have survived the crash. "You need something from your ship," David said, understanding. "Medicine? Supplies?" The alien nodded and touched the crystal growths on her arm. Through their connection, David felt her desperate need for specific minerals that would help her body heal. Without them, she would die within days, maybe hours. David pulled over and checked his phone's GPS. The crash site was about 100 miles north, deep in the wilderness, where no roads existed. It would mean leaving the truck behind and hiking through some of the most dangerous terrain in Alaska. In winter, with someone who could barely walk. But what choice did they have? David drove as far north as the roads would take them constantly. Checking his mirrors for signs of pursuit, so far nothing. The facility was probably still dealing with the false fire alarm. But once they realized what had really happened, every law enforcement agency in the state would be looking for them as they drove. The alien shared more of her memories with David. Her people had incredible healing abilities, but they required specific crystalline compounds to activate. Her ship had carried emergency supplies of these minerals, stored in a crash-resistant compartment designed to survive almost anything. If the cache had survived, she could heal. If it hadn't, she would die, and David would have thrown away his life for nothing. They reached the end of the road just as the sun was setting. David had brought winter survival gear in his truck, but hiking through the wilderness at night would be suicide. They would have to wait until morning and hope their head start was enough. David found a small hunting cabin about a mile from where they had parked. It was abandoned and unlocked, probably used by hunters during the season. It would shelter them for the night, but it wasn't much. No electricity, no heat except for an old wood stove, and no way to know if the alien would survive until morning. David got a fire started while the alien rested on an old cot. She was fading fast, her breathing shallow and irregular. The crystal growths on her skin were almost completely dark now, like dying embers. As the cabin warmed up, David tried to make her more comfortable. He shared his water and the energy bars from his emergency kit, but she could barely keep anything down. Her body was shutting down, and there was nothing David could do to stop it. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to himself. "Just hold on until tomorrow. We're going to find what you need." The alien looked at him with those shifting eyes, now a pale blue that reminded David of winter sky. Through their connection, he felt her gratitude. Not just for helping her escape, but for treating her like a person instead of a thing. The first time in 3 years, someone had shown her kindness, but gratitude wouldn't keep her alive through the night. David sat by the fire, listening to her labored breathing and watching the snow fall outside the cabin windows. Somewhere behind them, people were probably already searching. Tomorrow, they would have to venture into the wilderness, racing against time to find something that might not even exist anymore. David thought about his daughter, about the life he was leaving behind, about the choice he had made. He was either a hero or a fool, and he wouldn't know which until tomorrow. As the fire crackled and the alien rested fitfully beside him, David realized that for the first time in his adult life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. David woke up to the sound of helicopters in the distance. The morning sun was just peeking through the cabin windows and the fire had burned down to glowing embers. He sat up quickly, his neck stiff from sleeping in the old wooden chair. Alien was still breathing, but barely. Her skin had turned an alarming shade of pale blue, and the crystal growths along her arms looked completely lifeless now. David checked his watch. It had maybe 6 hours before the search teams would expand their grid to include this area. "Hey," David said softly, kneeling beside her cot. "We need to go. You hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, shifting from gray to a very faint silver. She was still with him, but just barely. David helped her sit up, and she leaned heavily against him for support. Through their mental connection, he could feel how much effort it took for her to stay conscious. David packed their few supplies quickly. The alien tried to stand, but collapsed immediately. Her legs simply wouldn't support her weight anymore. David realized he would have to carry her the rest of the way. "It's okay," he told her, as he lifted her carefully into his arms. "I've got you." She was so light now that carrying her felt like holding a child. David strapped on his backpack and stepped out into the crisp morning air. According to his GPS, the crash site was still 8 miles north through thick forest and rocky terrain. The first few miles weren't too bad. David had stayed in good shape, and the alien didn't weigh much. But as the morning wore on and the terrain got rougher, he began to struggle. His back ached, his legs burned, and his breathing became labored in the thin mountain air. The alien seemed to sense his exhaustion. Through their connection, she shared something that surprised him. Strength. Not physical strength, but something deeper. A kind of mental energy that helped David keep going when his body wanted to quit. "Your people can do that?" David asked. As they rested beside a frozen stream, share energy with others. Images flashed in his mind. The alien showed him memories of her homeworld, where her kind worked together to heal not just individuals but entire ecosystems. They could share their life force with dying planets, bringing back forests and oceans that had been destroyed by war or disaster. But then she showed him something that made David's blood run cold. The destruction of her world hadn't been a natural disaster. It had been caused by something else, something that was still out there, moving through space like a cosmic plague. David saw it through her memories, a dark wave of energy that consumed everything in its path. Stars, planets, entire solar systems vanishing into nothingness. Her people had discovered it decades ago and had been trying to warn other civilizations. But most species refused to listen until it was too late. That's why you were traveling, David realized. You weren't just exploring. You were running from that thing and trying to warn others. The alien nodded weakly. Through their connection, David felt her grief for the billions of her people who had died trying to stop the cosmic threat. And he felt something else that terrified him. The dark wave was still moving, still consuming everything in its path. And according to her calculations, it was heading toward Earth. David's hands started shaking, and not from the cold. The images that flashed in his mind showed him star charts and complex calculations that he only partially understood. But the basic message was clear. Maybe a year, maybe less, before that wave of destruction reached Earth's solar system. Does anyone on Earth know about this? David asked. More images? Government scientists studying the alien ships? Data. Military leaders looking at star charts with expressions of growing horror. They knew. Some people in positions of power knew what was coming, but they had no idea how to stop it. The alien showed him more. Her people's technology could help. The same energy-sharing abilities that let them heal dying worlds could potentially create a barrier against the cosmic threat. But it would require cooperation between species. Trust and understanding that didn't exist between humans and aliens. David understood now why saving her was so important. She wasn't just one individual. She might be Earth's only hope for survival. The helicopter sounds were getting closer. David forced himself to his feet and lifted the alien again. They had to reach the crash site before the search teams found them. Not just for their own freedom anymore, but for the future of humanity itself. The last 2 miles were the hardest of David's life. The terrain was all uphill, rocky and covered in thick snow. Several times he slipped and nearly fell, only barely. Managing to protect the alien from hitting the ground, his vision started to blur from exhaustion, and his lungs burned in the cold air. But finally, they reached the crash site. David had expected to find obvious wreckage, but the site had been cleaned up years ago. All that remained was a circular area where nothing grew, where the ground was still scorched from the impact. For a terrifying moment, David thought they had come all this way for nothing. But the alien stirred in his arms and pointed weakly toward a cluster of large rocks. Through their connection, she guided him to a specific spot where her ship's emergency cache should have been buried. David set her down gently and began digging through the snow and dirt with his bare hands. His fingers went numb in minutes, but he kept digging. 3 feet down, his hand struck something metallic. It was a small, cylindrical container, about the size of a coffee can, made from some kind of metal that didn't feel quite right to human touch. The alien's eyes brightened slightly when she saw it, shifting to that hopeful golden color. But when David tried to open the container, nothing happened. There was no visible lock, no buttons or switches, just smooth metal that seemed completely sealed. The alien reached out with a trembling hand and touched the container. Immediately it began to glow with soft blue light, and sections of it started to shift and open like a flower blooming. Inside were dozens of small crystal formations, each one pulsing with different colors. The alien selected one of the crystals, a deep purple stone about the size of David's thumb. She held it against the dying crystal growths on her arm, and immediately David could see the change. Color began flowing back into her skin, and her breathing became deeper and more regular. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The sound of helicopters was very close now, and David could hear dogs barking in the distance. The search teams had found their trail. The alien looked at David with eyes that were now bright gold, filled with life and determination. Through their connection, he felt her gratitude and something else, a promise. She would find a way to help humanity, even if it cost her everything. But first, they had to survive the next few hours. David helped her to her feet, amazed at how much stronger she already looked. The crystal was working faster than he had dared to hope, but they were still deep in the wilderness, with an entire military operation hunting them down. "What do we do now?" David asked. The alien smiled for the first time since he had met her, and her answer came not in images, but in actual words, spoken directly into his mind. "Now we fight back." The helicopters circled overhead like angry wasps as David and the alien hid behind the rocky outcropping. She was stronger now, the healing crystal having restored much of her energy, but they were still trapped. Military vehicles were approaching from 3 directions, and the barking of tracking dogs grew louder by the minute. David's mind raced through their limited options. They could try to run deeper into the wilderness, but winter was setting in, and they had limited supplies. Could surrender, but that would mean the alien going back to that cold cell, probably forever this time. "There has to be another way," David muttered. Watching the search teams close in, the alien placed her hand on his shoulder, and suddenly David's mind filled with images that took his breath away. She was showing him something incredible. People weren't extinct. There were others, scattered across distant stars, waiting for a signal that their lost sister was alive. "You can contact them?" David asked in amazement. She nodded and pointed to the crystal formations they had found. With the right combination, she could send a message across the galaxy, but it would take time and the signal would be visible to anyone with the right equipment, including the humans who were hunting them. Before David could respond, a voice echoed across the clearing through a megaphone. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Colonel Harrison. We know you're out there. Come out with your hands up and no one gets hurt." David recognized the voice. Harrison was the facility's military commander, a man known for following orders without question. But there was something different in his tone today, something that sounded almost uncertain. The alien stood up slowly, her crystal growths now glowing bright blue in the morning light, as she looked at David with those shifting eyes. Now, a determined gold color. "What are you doing?" David whispered. Through their mental connection, he felt her resolve. She was going to surrender herself. To save him? After everything he had risked for her, she was willing to sacrifice her freedom so he could go home to his daughter. "No," David said firmly, grabbing her arm. "We're in this together now." Before either of them could move, something unexpected happened. A young girl's voice called out from beyond the military perimeter. Dad, are you out there?" David's heart stopped. That was Katie's voice. His 12-year-old daughter was somehow here, in the middle of a military operation in the Alaskan wilderness. How was that even possible? Colonel Harrison's voice came through the megaphone again, but now it sounded frustrated. "Dr. Mitchell, your daughter flew up here with her mother. She insisted on coming to find you. She says she knows you're trying to help someone who needs it. Come out so we can all talk about this like reasonable people." David looked at the alien, who seemed as confused as he was. Through their connection, she shared an image that made him understand. His daughter had been following the news coverage of their escape. Katie had convinced her mother that David wouldn't do something like this unless it was important. "Really important, Dad." Katie's voice called again, closer now. "I know you're not a bad person. I know you're trying to help." The alien's eyes shifted to a soft silver color, and David felt something warm flow through their connection. Hope, but also sadness. She was thinking about her own family, her own people, who were gone forever. Slowly, David and the alien stepped out from behind the rocks with their hands raised. The sight that greeted them was unlike anything David had expected. Yes, there were soldiers with weapons drawn, and yes, Colonel Harrison looked stern and official. But there were also news cameras, curious scientists, and right in front, a small figure in a bright red winter coat. Katie broke free from her mother's grip and ran toward David, ignoring the shouts from the soldiers. "Him," staring up at the alien with wide, amazed eyes. "Wow," Katie breathed. "She's beautiful." The alien knelt down to Katie's eye level, and her crystal growths began to pulse with gentle rainbow colors. Katie reached out slowly and touched one of the crystals on the alien's hand. The moment they made contact, Katie's eyes went wide. "She's not scary at all," Katie announced to everyone watching. "She's just hurt and lonely. And she's trying to warn us about something really bad that's coming." Colonel Harrison lowered his weapon, looking confused. "What is she talking about?" David took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "She's talking about the cosmic threat your scientists already know about. The one that destroyed her homeworld. The one that's heading for Earth right now." A murmur went through the gathered crowd. Harrison's face went pale, and David realized he had hit the mark. The government did know about the approaching danger. "How do you know about that?" Harrison demanded. "Because she told me," David said, gesturing to the alien. "Her people have been fighting this thing for decades. They know how to stop it, but they need our help." The alien stood up and began to speak, not with her voice, but directly into everyone's minds. David watched as soldiers, scientists, and even the news crews stopped what they were doing and listened to something only they could hear. She was sharing her story with all of them. The destruction of her world, her people's sacrifice to warn others, and most importantly, the solution that could save both their species. When the mental communication ended, the clearing was completely silent except for the wind blowing through the trees. Colonel Harrison was the first to speak. "Is it true? Can your people really help us stop this threat?" The alien nodded and pointed to the sky. David felt her message in his mind, and he translated for the others. "She says her people are already on their way. They've been waiting for her signal. But they need to know that humans can be trusted, that we won't treat them the way we treated her." Katie stepped forward, still holding the alien's hand. "We can be better," she said with the simple honesty that only children possess. "We can be friends." The alien looked down at Katie and smiled, her eyes shifting to that warm golden color David had come to associate with happiness. She knelt down again and placed her other hand gently on Katie's forehead. Images flashed through David's mind, shared with everyone present through the alien's expanded telepathic range. They saw her people's ships approaching Earth, filled with technology and knowledge that could protect the planet. They saw humans and aliens working together to build a shield that could deflect the cosmic threat. They saw a future where both species survived and thrived, but they also saw the alternative. Earth consumed by the same dark wave that had destroyed countless other worlds. Humanity's brief moment in the universe ending in silence and darkness, Colonel Harrison made the call that saved 2 worlds. He ordered his soldiers to stand down and ask the alien if she would be willing to help them contact her people. 6 months later, David stood in the observation deck of the new Joint Research Facility, watching as human and alien engineers worked side by side to complete the planetary defense system. The cosmic threat was still months away, but they were ready for it now. Katie was there too, spending her summer vacation learning about alien technology and serving as an unofficial ambassador between the species. She had a gift for understanding. The aliens that amazed everyone, including David, the alien David had rescued, who now went by the name Luna, at Katie's suggestion, had become the leader of the joint project. Her crystal growths had fully healed, and she glowed with vibrant health and purpose. "Dad," Katie said, tugging on David's sleeve. "Hey, Luna wants to show us something." David looked down at his daughter, still amazed at how everything had changed. He had thought he was sacrificing his relationship with Katie when he chose to save Luna instead. He had given his daughter a galaxy full of new friends and possibilities. Luna approached them, her eyes the warm gold color that David now knew meant contentment. Through their connection, she shared one final image with him. Earth, protected and safe, with ships from dozens of species coming to visit and learn. Humanity taking its place in a larger community of worlds, no longer alone in the universe. "Thank you," David whispered. Luna's response came not in words or images, but in a feeling of gratitude so pure and strong that it brought tears to David's eyes. She had found a new family among the humans, and they had found hope among the stars. Outside the observation deck, the defense array hummed with alien technology, ready to protect both species from the darkness approaching from deep space. And in that moment, David realized that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted was the only way to find everything you actually needed.